Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Bad news. That's what President Trump said about the former ambassador to Ukraine. He also fired her. Well, she's testifying today during the second day of public impeachment hearings.
As the drama unfolds, Democrats are shifting their strategy. Why and what's their latest tactic? Gary Lane explains.
You're unlikely to hear the words quid pro quo spoken by Democrats, at least not as often as before. That's because the phrase apparently isn't getting much traction for them in the impeachment hearings. So they're rephrasing it to make sure their accusation is simpler for people to understand. They're now saying President Trump is guilty of bribery.
The bribe is to grant or withhold military assistance in return for a public statement of a fake investigation into the elections. That's bribery.
House Speaker Pelosi and other Democrats believe the president withheld military assistance to Ukraine until that government reopened a bribery investigation of Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter. Ukrainian President Zelensky says he didn't feel pressured to act. And Ukraine's foreign minister, Vadim Prystaiko, said Thursday that, quote, I've never seen a direct link between investigations and security assistance. Yes, investigations were mentioned, in a presidential conversation, but there was no clear connection between these events. Testifying today, former Ukraine ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, who was fired by Trump. At a Keep America Great rally in Louisiana, President Trump criticized the testimony of the first two witnesses to appear at the impeachment hearings. The president blasted the Democrats for leading what he says is a deranged impeachment witch hunt.
We did nothing wrong, and they're doing nothing. True. They haven't done a thing. Since Nancy Pelosi is Speaker, they haven't done a thing. But once again, their lies will be exposed, just like the last times.
Interviews by Reuters show the impeachment hearings may be unlikely to change the minds of voters in two key swing states, Michigan and Pennsylvania, states the president needs to win if he's to be reelected. And a Reuters poll in early November found 75% of Democrats support impeachment. 79% of Republicans are opposed. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy says the Democrats are wasting time as the country faces more pressing matters.
Name me one thing that those witnesses said yesterday was impeachable. So why are we putting the country through this, and why aren't we working on the things that the American public expects us to do?
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Well, we're witnessing political theater. That's my opinion. This is political theater. And it looks like the Democrats have gotten themselves boxed into a corner where they started talking impeachment literally the day of his swearing in. And so they've been, banging that drum now for a long time. And when you get your supporters ginned up, if you will, to look for impeachment and you're not able to deliver on that, then you think you're going to suffer at the polls. So if there's no underlying reason for it, if you have to switch from quid pro quo into, well, now it's bribery and, we're going to keep searching for something to impeach him on until we finally do it. I don't think they understand that they're playing with fire, that if you overturn an election based on this kind of evidence, what does that mean for the next president coming in? And are we creating precedents for future presidents that we really shouldn't be creating at all? This is a dangerous situation for our republic, and we have to understand it and look at it in those terms. There's an election coming up. It's only a year away. If you don't like the guy, great, then go out and campaign against him. But to use this kind of political weapon and have this kind of political theater, I think they're playing with fire. In other news, people are mourning the deaths of two students after a high school shooting yesterday, yet another high school shooting, this time outside Los Angeles. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. It only took 16 seconds for a California high school student to shoot 5 classmates before turning the gun on himself, the self-inflicted wound sending him to the hospital in critical condition. People came together in the Los Angeles suburb of Santa Clarita to remember the 2 murdered students, a 16-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy. 2 other girls were wounded but are listed in good condition. These students described what happened.
we heard what sounded like binders dropping, because that happens,
or a birthday balloon popping.
Especially by the library where it echoes. But then there was still something in our gut that told us that it was wrong.
That doesn't sound exactly like a balloon.
And so everyone went quiet. And then we heard two more. And that's when
we're like, this is not
realized.
okay. Something is wrong. This is not normal.
Yeah.
And then another pause, and 3 more, and that's when
we grabbed our friends and we just ran.
Police investigated the home of the suspect, a 16-year-old boy who carried out the attack on his birthday. They believe he acted alone and don't think he was affiliated, Gordon, with any certain group or ideology.
Well, this one's a mystery, and it's going to be a mystery until we, come up with something on the reason why. I'm sitting in Virginia Beach. We had a mass shooting here, and we still don't know why. As long as we're searching for those answers, I don't think we're going to be satisfied. But here's something I want to underline. California has the strictest gun laws in the entire union. There is no other state that is more strict in terms of assault weapons, in terms of extended magazines. In California, it is absolutely illegal to sell a handgun to anyone under the age of 21. It's also illegal to give a handgun to anyone under 18. So how did this 16-year-old get a handgun? So looking at this and looking at what I know is going to happen, where there's going to be renewed calls, let's have more and more gun legislation, and I'm certainly not in favor of people having assault weapons or extended magazines or any of that. But we have to say there's another cause here, and you can have all the laws on the books, and if a 16-year-old is able to get access to a gun and go to his school and shoot people on his birthday, well, then what law is there against that? And I think underlying all of this is we've lost the sense of the sacredness of life. We have lost the sense that there are eternal consequences to action. And when those things aren't restraining this, well, then this is what we're seeing. And we've been reaping it since Columbine. And we keep talking about more and more legislation without understanding, well, there's an underlying moral issue here. And if you don't think there are eternal consequences, you need to think again. And that needs to be a message for our culture today. We have to return back to that. There is a God. There are eternal consequences to your actions. You need to live your life in accordance with those 10 commandments. And one of them is very specific. Thou shalt not kill. John?
Very true, Gordon. Well, in other news, the jury in the federal civil suit filed by Planned Parenthood against the pro-life Center for Medical Progress is still deliberating today. The abortion giant is suing CMP investigators over undercover videos which allegedly show the discussion of the sale of the body parts of aborted babies. But the judge reportedly already declared the defendants guilty of some charges before the jury even had a chance to consider the evidence. According to the Daily Wire, Judge William Orrick told the jury he found the defendants guilty of trespassing Planned Parenthood events and ordered them to decide if it should receive monetary damages and how much. Pro-life and religious freedom groups claim Orrick is biased against the defendants. The Freedom of Conscience Defense Fund made an unsuccessful bid to force Orrick to recuse himself from the case. The group said the judge had a, quote, an ongoing and long-standing professional relationship with Planned Parenthood, noting that he founded a family resource center that housed a Planned Parenthood facility within its complex. Planned Parenthood originally sought $20 million in damages, but Judge Orrick did limit the potential damages to $600,000. Well, Israel says it's finished with its airstrikes on targets in Gaza linked to the group Islamic Jihad. That statement today issued after a barrage of rockets were launched late Thursday following the ceasefire. Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system intercepted most of those rockets. The unofficial ceasefire came after 2 days of fighting. A controversial ruling from the European Union this week about Israeli products brought a swift reaction from the Israeli government. Chris Mitchell brings us that story from Jerusalem.
Israel quickly condemned a ruling from the European Union's top court that products from the so-called West Bank cannot carry the Made in Israel label.
The indication of origin of the products originating in Israeli settlements must be correct and not misleading to the consumer.
Reaction was swift and widespread. Danny Janone, Israel's UN ambassador, saying this is another example of Europe continuing its surrender to Israel's enemies. The EU's discrimination against the Zionist enterprise will provide legal cover for anti-Semitism.
Israel strongly rejects the recent ruling of the European Court of Justice, which has one aim and one aim only, and that is to signal out Israel and to apply double standards against it.
Expressing deep concern, the U.S. State Department said the ruling suggested anti-Israel bias. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu credited Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for providing clarity, something Europe clearly failed to do.
Europe the other day decided to act against Israel and to put labels on products that are made here. They don't join exactly the sanctions against Iran. They join sanctions against Israel. Unbelievable.
PLO's Hanan Ashwari welcomed the labeling decision as a first step.
We believe the real thing that should happen, the only just thing, is not to import these settlement products and produce in the first place.
Professor Gerald Steinberg of the NGO Monitor condemned the decision, calling it a gateway drug towards boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Israel Gantz, head of the group governing the Israeli settlements, doesn't believe the ruling will hurt businesses.
The product here is of high standards. Everyone wants to produce, Jews and Arabs. There is demand in the markets, and therefore, besides this miserable decision, I hope and estimate there will be no impact.
Boycotts of Israeli companies in the West Bank often backfire, hurting Palestinians more than the intended targets. Case in point, SodaStream. CBN News has documented the company's success and its employment of some 500 Palestinians, paying them 4 times the salary likely provided by Palestinian employers. Attacked for years by the BDS movement, SodaStream eventually moved operations inside Israel, costing most of the Palestinians their jobs. For now, Israel can only wait and see if the new ruling has any impact. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Well, it's not only the Israeli government that's responding. Members of both parties, Gordon, here in Congress in the United States are also opposed to the EU court's decision.
Well, there should be. What's the impact of this kind of decision? You have a label on a product in a market in Europe, and the label says this was made in a settlement on the West Bank. Well, if the consumer says, well, I'm not going to buy that because it's made in a settlement, the impact is not on Israel. The impact is on the Palestinians who are being employed in order to produce that product. So it is a horrible thing to do, and SodaStream is a prime example. Here, they literally had to close their plant that was employing Palestinians and move to another part of Israel in order to produce the product. They're now going fine. Their product is great, but the 500 Palestinians they had employed are now unemployed. So if we're looking for peace and we're looking for Israelis and Palestinians to work together, then we ought to be encouraging industry. And when you see what's happening in the Palestinian Authority, there's no intent to build industry. And frankly, there's no intent to build a state. What their intent from Hamas, from the PLO, from the Palestinian Authority is to drive Israel to the sea. That's the purpose, and that's the reason they exist. They're not trying to create a second state. They're not trying to provide employment for their people. They are trying to foment violence, and they pay people to kill Israelis. That's been proven. Until we start recognizing for what it is, then you're never going to see it. And the worst thing to do is to penalize companies that are trying to bring Palestinian and Israelis together to say, hey, if we actually work together, we can have a much better future. But it's not their intent. And let me underline again and again and again, from the beginnings of the PLO, from the beginnings of Hamas, from the beginnings of the Palestinian Authority, their sole purpose to drive Israel into the sea. We should never support that.